everyone. Welcome to Veteran Voices. I'm your host, Mary Kate Saliva, and I'm super excited about our guest today. But before I introduce our special guest, just a quick programming note before we get started. So, Veteran Voices is a podcast where I interview veterans, but again, today's a special episode. I typically interview those who are serving beyond the uniform, serving outside the military community or even within the military community. And we are in part of the Supply Chain Now family of podcasts and programming, and you can get the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. The other thing is that we are in partnership with the Guam Human Rights Initiative, a nonprofit that's near and dear to my heart. And you can learn more about the Guam Human Rights Initiative at guamhri.org. So, without further ado, why I say this is a special guest and especially special episode is in my time interviewing veterans on the show, it's about time that I interviewed a military spouse. Here we have an active military spouse, Maureen Woolshlager. Thank you for joining me today on Veteran Voices, which now I feel like we're gonna have to rename.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I do feel a little bit of pressure though, since I'm the first.
I know. I was like trying to think. I was like, I'm pretty sure that Scott, the main original host of Veteran Voices, I'm pretty sure he has interviewed other spouses in the past, but this is my first golden nugget. I'm so happy that we were connected and that we're finally getting to do this show. So again, what I love about with you in particular, you've been part of the supply chain family for a long time as well, which is how we initially got connected. But I love to kick off the show with a favorite quote, a motivational quote. So before we dive into more about you, would you mind sharing that quote with us?
Oh, no, thanks for asking. So I actually have this quote on one of these little magnets on my fridge,
I
and
love
it's been on my refrigerator for almost 20 years. And if we talk more about my journey the past 15, 20 years, you'll understand actually how many refrigerators it's been on in our journey. But the quote is from Henry Van Dyke, and it's said, "Be glad of life." And it says, "Because it gives you the chance to love and to work and to play and to look up to the stars, to be satisfied with your possessions, to despise nothing in the world except falsehood and meanness, and to fear nothing except cowardice, to be governed by your admirations rather than by your disgusts, to covet nothing that is your neighbor's except his kindness of heart and gentleness of manners, to think seldom of your enemies, often of your friends, and to spend as much time as you can with body and spirit. These are little guideposts on the footpath to peace." So it's a long quote, and it's just been on my fridge. It's one of those, white magnets you see with the black writing. When you go to the grocery store, you see cards and magnets and stuff. And I bought it
Yes.
a long time ago, and it's there. And maybe my kids read it subconsciously. I'm not sure, but hopefully they carry that message around with
Subliminal
them too.
messaging. Be good people.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those.
No, I think it's a really powerful quote, and I know you see it's been a magnet that's been around with your family for 20 years, and I know we'll get into a bit later, but you've also moved around a lot in the last couple decades, so that magnet has been all over the place. So
Yes.
we're gonna sort of dive right in. One of the things that I also love about Veteran Voices, getting the opportunity to hear where my guests grew up. And I think that's a significant part of just our roots and where we started out in life. And so I failed to mention that you're married to a Green Beret now, but tell me about way before you met him and a little bit about where you grew up and some anecdotes from that time.
Well, I was born outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I grew up in the suburbs of Philly. And I lived in the same house and, went to the same school district until I graduated high school. And so, we'll kind of get into it a little, but a very different experience than my kids are having now. But it definitely gave me a really phenomenal understanding of what a community is like. The schools are great. It's right outside a city that has tons of history. It's an hour and a half from Washington, D.C. So growing up, I was able to, where our school field trips were to New York City and to Washington, D.C. and into Philly to see the Liberty Bell and things like that. So Growing up, my family traveled a little bit out west, to go to see some national parks and things like that. But we didn't do, the vacations or move anywhere that, my kids have done just because of our lifestyle. So it definitely gave me some perspective on, I'm still friends with a lot of the people that I grew up with and went to even daycare with. And so it's a really wonderful place to grow up. So hopefully in our current setting, since we think we're gonna be here for a while, hopefully my kids start to get that sort of long-term feeling of community.
I think that's wonderful. I knew we had talked just before recording, but would love to hear about. Did you have being so close to DC, obviously the nation's capital, very patriotic, American flags everywhere. But did you have any of that influence of the military growing up at all? Family, uh, close friends, anything near a military
Um,
installation?
no, I mean, one of my great grandfathers was in my great grandfathers, both of them were in the military. My grandparents were as well. But in my town, there wasn't a military presence. It wasn't ever part of our lifestyle growing up,
Mm,
and we didn't have a lot of people moving in and out of the community where I lived. So even the sort of transition that my kids have now, like going to a new school every year or 2 years. There wasn't really any of that I remember growing up. There was rarely like the new kid or the new kids every year. Whereas, now my children are going to school and, 15-20% of the students are at least turning over sort of every year. So very different. I knew nothing about going into the military, to be honest with you. Even, as I've learned more about it, I feel like it would have been an interesting career path for me had I had more exposure to it growing up, but I didn't have any idea what sort of offerings it had.
That's really interesting to me, and I ask that because a lot of times, especially on Veteran Voices, I usually ask the veterans about their advice to those transitioning from the military right now. And the transition is a big part at the towards the end of our military career, whether we only served 4 years or we did over 20 years. But with regards to you as an active duty military spouse who's moved numerous times that we're going to get into, I think that that piece about whether you had any sort of military culture nearby, that is a big transition that you went into marrying a Green Beret, marrying into that culture, especially the special operations community in particular, where I feel like the level of the missions, there's a higher threat level there. So, if you could talk to us about how you went about meeting your husband, and did you have any sort of hesitancies there about stepping into the military world?
Honestly, when I first met him, he was one of the first people that I met that had grown up in a military lifestyle. Like he's an army brat, and
Hmm.
then, decided that that's what gave him the opportunity or the visibility to say, "Oh, I want to try this lifestyle as well," and he wanted to serve. But we kind of came together with very sort of polarized experiences growing up. I lived in the same house until I went to college. And I think he went to like 10 or 12 schools before he graduated high
Wow.
school. So his family did not move back and forth overseas like we have in our marriage, but the sort of way that he has had experiences growing up and developing relationships and friendships and things like that is just very different than mine. And so kind of co-parenting with our different perspectives on what works for kids and what doesn't, we don't really clash on it. We kind of complement on it because we're lucky in that way that we're coming to the table with two totally different personal experiences. So I won't say I had any hesitation when I met him about his lifestyle, but it was something that I was like curious about, but not turned off by per se. It just was I was interested in. I just didn't have any exposure to it before, whether it be, the regular military, the special operations community, all of it. I didn't know the difference in either, so definitely like a lot of learning in the past, 19 years.
That's what, and that sort of gets me to my
Yeah.
next question is, were you ready for what you're
I
about
think
to embark on the
I don't think I
journey?
knew really, but I think, that's one of the things where when you're talking to people who are in the civilian community who are not, like let's
Mm,
say me as a 15-year-old or 20-year-old before I knew anything about the military lifestyle, people say like, oh, well, when you're struggling, if whether it be for, stopping and starting your career or moving around a lot, and they're like, well, you knew what you were getting into. I'm like, I think that's like a very general sort of statement that you can say on a high level. Yes, you know that you might not be in the same place for a long time, and your spouse may be in and out of different trainings or schools or deployments, but outside of that, this is my opinion, right? Unless you have your own personal experience from that, whether it be you saw friends go through it or you grew up in it, I don't know that you really have any idea what you're getting into. So I can't say I knew. I knew that he would be gone a lot because before we got married, he was gone a lot, but he hadn't moved. I mean, we met in Colorado Springs and we were here for 4 years before we moved. So it wasn't as though the whole PCS, which in military terms is permanent change of station. It's when military families move. We hadn't done that. So that whole piece is not, it's different for everyone and depends if you go overseas or just one state over, whether you have kids or family, all of that. So it's tough to really put it into a box and say, yes, I knew or no, I didn't know. I think you have to be pretty adaptable uh, and open to really, you never know what's coming from the left or the right.
No, that's so true. And I didn't learn until I was on active duty that the PCS move is something that it's definitely a privilege compared to I speaking to host nation militaries. They don't, that's not something that they do. Sometimes the soldier could get stationed in one part of the country and their families in the other half, and they won't see each other for years on end. And it's definitely a different dynamic of the US military really trying to keep the family dynamic together. But as you said, it
Right.
really is that personal experience. And why I was so excited is because I know that you two in particular have been together and married for quite a long time, which I think is incredible, especially in the active duty lifestyle, which much is so different than guard and the reserve lifestyles there. So active duty, you could take us to, if you could share with our listeners a bit about the early years of his career. And I know you had mentioned before offline about how he had just finished the qualification course as a Green Beret. So did he end up deploying right away at some point and sort of talking us through the early parts of his career and what that dynamic was for you?
So once I had met him right after he had finished the Q course, and then I think that I met him here in Colorado, which we are here now, but we just recently returned here. But I think he was home. He did a bunch of trainings and things, so I was in and out for a month here or 2 months there, and then I, I want to say it was a year later. He deployed for 9 months, and then he was home for 6 months, and then he deployed for 9 months again. And then he was home for 4 or 5 months. And then during that period, we got married, if I'm doing the math right. And then we moved to Germany for 2 years. He did not deploy then. And then we moved to California for 2 years, and that was for school. So we didn't deploy there. Then we moved back to Germany, and he deployed for 9 months while we were there. And then we went to Belgium and he did not deploy there. And then we went to Fort Liberty in North Carolina.
Mhm.
And we were there for a couple years. And during that time was also COVID. And during COVID, he deployed for an entire year. And
Wow.
then he's been back since then. And then we went to Paris for 11 months. And then we just returned to the States. So we've had a lot of back and forth and a lot of deployments, but also there's a lot of TDY, in the civilian world, we call those business trips, right? So it could be school, it could be just travel that's required for the job,
Right.
it could be short-term assignments. So it's not as though it goes from like an 8 to 5 job to a 9 month deployment. There's quite a bit of long hours, time away, things like that. So it's
I'm
a
glad I'm
unique,
glad you highlighted that.
yeah,
Because the TDY, as you said, like those business trips, that time that he's home, there's still airborne operations, right? And it could take him a day or two of doing all that, and then going on these different trips, refreshing his language training. There's other things that's required of him in his
right.
job. And that dynamic of you keeping down the home front, so to speak. And
Yeah.
during that time, were you working at that time?
So I've stopped and started quite a bit of times. I think the back and forth overseas moves definitely, especially prior to COVID, put a hard pause on working because at the time prior to COVID, when working remotely was not really socialized and also depending on which country you're in, there's rules whether or not you can work even though you are physically in the country, but you're working for a company in another country, there's those sorts of rules.
Mm,
And then we had young children for a period of time. I mean, my kids aren't that old, but they're older now. They're not babies. And so, when they're babies and we're in another country and things like that, I took a break. But I've been working since we full time, really without a break since 2018 when we came back. And then I took a sabbatical when we left Fort Liberty last summer and we moved to Paris for, it was about a year. But some of that had to do with the schedule that he was going to have when we were in France, but also with the visa and how the French government and the embassy sort of sponsored us to be there. And to be honest with you, 11 months round trip is not time to really get settled and start a job or do anything. So that
right.
was just sort of a break. But I think the the military spouse employment thing is its whole topic we could spend hours on, and I'm willing to spend that on that. But I think it's tough because I understand, even though I get frustrated at times, and sometimes there's conflict just because it's your frustration has to go somewhere. But, when I work and I choose to do things, and everybody in the family is excited about that, but some of the burden of taking care of the other responsibilities falls on me because my husband is not in charge always of his schedule. And, the Army sort of owns him. So if he has to go away, he can't
Mm,
say, oh, well, my wife has to go away too. They're kind of like, okay, you still have to go away, right? And so I've
mhm.
been lucky enough, I was working for a company where everybody worked from home, and this was before COVID and
Right.
very family friendly. I mean, they were results based, so you still had to do your work, but they were very understanding of that. I also had other responsibilities, and so I kind of demonstrated I could do both. Sometimes it meant I sacrificed sleep or something, but you have to find that niche where you can have the balance that's best for your family at the time. Yeah.
So I think that's important to note too about you said when your kids were young. And how many kids do you have?
So I have 3 kids. I
Three
have
kids.
my oldest is about to be 13 next week, and my twins are going to be 11 in 2 weeks. So, they're really
You have
close in
twins.
age, and yeah,
So
that's
that's what I'm
all.
saying. Like when you were taking that time off, that's not necessarily uncommon
Yeah,
for the wife to end up being staying at home, especially like
right,
you mentioned when it's not even worth going to find a job, when it was such a quick turnaround that you're going to come back to the States again.
right,
And then navigating, and I know in some overseas duty stations you can't even drive, and you can't even live
right,
off base. So
right.
there's like so many rules, and you're having to navigate that and language barriers. And
Mhm.
so I really commend you for holding down the fort during that time. And as you said, like having to do what you had to do. But as you mentioned, we could spend so many hours just on the military spouse aspect, and depending on the occupation that the spouse has, having to get
Right.
relicensed every time they move to a different
Mhm.
state, if their job requires a license or a certification, and just even navigating school. And And I love that you mentioned the pandemic because we saw there was sort of a stigma back in the day of having that online work. And I know when I was a kid, it was like telemarketing. It was like, oh, you're that
Yes,
annoying person calling on the phone,
yes,
annoying people,
yes.
or you're like a salesperson, or like
Mhm.
Mary Kay was like the
Yes,
pyramids seem to like the only jobs that you could do kind of
yes.
like if you were that spouse, right? But there's so many other opportunities now and really cool jobs out there. But I have seen that spike since the pandemic. And so how has that been for you as far as support goes? Like, have you felt like you've been navigating sort of that career aspect solo, or have you garnered that support elsewhere?
Well, I think like two things. One is that, I was working for a company during the pandemic that already prior to the pandemic, everybody worked remotely for the most part. So when the pandemic hit, the company was still prosperous, moving forward. It affected the team members at the company because if you had kids, your kids were home, and you were trying to navigate that. But as far as being able to do our jobs, it was great. So I was really lucky that I was already working for that company at the time. And I only left last year because we had moved overseas. And so now kind of getting back into more formal professional roles, I'm still trying to iron out what that looks like and how that'll play out because our family dynamic is different now. I mean, my husband should not be deploying, I don't think, anytime soon. And he's sort of at the twilight of his career. So we're in a position now where I can be the one that's sort of like controlling the schedule and traveling more and things like that because of but it's that hasn't been possible sort of until now. So it's almost like the roles are sort of reversing.
You sound
Um,
ready to go, Maureen. Like you're like,
I am.
let's
I'm
go.
ready to
I am
go.
ready.
I'm going to be climbing up the
Ready
walls
for,
soon.
I'm ready for my business trips. I'll see you
Yes.
in 2 weeks.
Yes, yes. I'm like, look, I'm cool. You want to stay at home when you retire? It's totally fine. I'm off to the races here. And my husband's like totally supportive. He's like, I want you to do something that makes you happy. And I think he's kind of living vicariously through me a little, right? Because I have all this freedom to sort of peruse and choose
Mm-hmm.
and be deliberate about what I want to do where you are active duty, you don't really get a lot of choices sometimes and you're on a track or you might get to rank certain locations as a preference or certain areas that you want to go, but you don't have the freedom or the flexibility that those like in the civilian world have. So I think, I'm in a really wonderful position. And so I'm just trying to use that to my advantage for now. So to help set us up for, when he wants to retire and go fishing all day.
I
And,
love that.
I got
No,
that. Yeah.
I can think of it as like so many of the guys I've served with that are like, I am totally cool if I'm the stay at home,
Oh,
it's nice
yeah.
to, play
Yep.
video games all day or whatnot, or watch, like you
Mhm.
said, go fishing. So I
Yeah.
love that for you. And I know it couldn't have been easy, but having, like you said, that remote job opportunity. And with him in his twilight years, to transition, you have been
Mhm.
going through so many transitions during that part. And I think that that's something I really want our listeners to take away is that piece about leaning in to your spouse with
Mhm.
regards to that transition because they have been right there along for the ride the whole
Mhm.
way and they've gone through numerous transitions, and so you've got a lot of tools in your toolkit to overcome that, and finding that, picking yourself back up, finding something to do that fulfills you, that gives you some sort of purpose, whether that is in a paid capacity or in a volunteer capacity. And it sort of segues into the work that you've been doing that's on the nonprofit like giving side, because I know that that's not necessarily everybody's cup of tea, but for you, I think that that's something I'd really love if you wouldn't mind sharing some of the nonprofit side of the work that you've done in the past.
Yeah, so when I was working at Vector Global Logistics, they are very focused on giving back and serving the community and helping others. And so they just believe logistics is a way to make the world a better place. So when the war broke out in Ukraine, they started an initiative where they were going to sponsor one or two containers worth of goods going over uh, to Eastern Europe during the conflict. And it wasn't for arms or anything like that. It was humanitarian goods or medicines or things like that. And so I was able to be part of that initiative, speaking with other organizations, other NGOs and nonprofits and government organizations, trying to leverage the ability to help bring those goods and get them in the hands of that needed them, but also connecting people. We did it, I think weekly at first, and then we split it to bi-monthly and then monthly. And I believe it's still going on. We had these calls and there would be like 100 people on these video calls. And it was a way for others to get connected that would never have interacted before, whether it be for volunteering or fundraising or collecting goods or things like that. And it was a really unique way to be a part of helping others on the other side of the world that was in a non, like, for me, being able to see what's happening on like the military side and my husband's peers and people he's worked with before, being out in Eastern Europe. But for me to be on, let's say, the commercial civilian side of it and see how can we make these connections and provide support was a really great opportunity for me. And also I love connecting people. So it was nice to see people, your screen's filled up with all the faces and there's like 100 people on there.
Hollywood
And
Squares.
yes, exactly. And then it's like, oh, you want to connect with this person and making that happen behind the scenes and doing good in the process. So I was fortunate to be able to be a part of that when I was there. I think might have been for almost a year before I left for Paris. So I was doing it right up until I left. And that's been my main sort of like nonprofit volunteering opportunity. I mean, I participate in volunteering efforts within spouse groups when it's possible. And
Mhm.
there's one organization called Wear Blue, Run to Remember that I like to run. I'm not a fast runner. I participate a lot, but I don't win anything, and I'm okay
That's
with
the
that.
start, Maureen. You gotta love running because I can tell you I don't. So
You
I'm
know,
obvious. I'm
I
glad you do.
found that it was something I could do when my children were young, and especially when my husband was away, because you can do it with a stroller. You can do
I was
it,
gonna
you can
say, were you
walk.
one of those stroller moms that's
I
running out there?
was.
It always impresses me. They like
Okay, no,
pass
I
me
was
going
never
uphill.
running fast, but I did have a triple jogger at one point, which I think weighed 70 pounds. And so
Oh
it
my
was
gosh, the
absolutely
triple jog.
ridiculous.
Took it
Yeah.
very seriously.
No, I
That's
mean,
great.
but to be honest with you, it was a mental health thing as well
Yes,
because,
absolutely.
my husband deployed when my twins were 4 months old and my son was two. We lived in Germany and I had a really phenomenal network of other military
Mm.
spouses there. I mean, I would not have survived without some of them. And every afternoon, I took my three kids and my dog out into the woods outside Stuttgart. And my 2-year-old could run around, in the woods. I wasn't worried about him going into traffic or anything. And I got some fresh air and my dog got to run. And I think if I didn't have that and I didn't have some of that companionship, it would have been really hard. And I'm not saying it was easy by any means to
Right.
have those three little kids and the dog and all that, but there's people that sort of come into your life, and you've seen this in your time in the military, and I have been fortunate with all the transition that we've had and the number of times I've had to start over, I've met some wonderful, supportive people and, I've carried them with me, and the whole time. And especially in that time when you're in the fog of babies and diapers and needs
Mm.
and all the things and being in a foreign
Especially as a new
country.
mom, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, there's a whole, let's say self-identity piece you go through when you become a military spouse and you have to, put your ego aside and understand that like your career or your needs or all those things don't come first. And that rears its ugly head sometimes and sometimes it doesn't, but we're all human, right? But then when you add on motherhood
Mm.
or parenthood, if you are a stay-at-home dad, there's that whole piece on top of it. So I think that if you find your people, it definitely makes some of the hardest situations a lot more manageable, but I think it also I mean, if you think about when we went and moved to Stuttgart, we were there were all these things sort of on paper stacked up against me, right? I had twin babies, I had a 2-year-old, I had this big dog, I didn't really know anyone. My husband left. I mean, that could have really been a recipe for an unhappy 2 years there. And that was one of our favorite assignments.
Mhm.
I don't remember. I feel like the fog of parenting, I don't remember it all, but I really had coming, I made some friends with some wonderful ladies in my neighborhood that were
Right.
German, and then some military spouses I met through the community. And, it was life-changing for me to understand sort of the female support system, how it can make or break things. And so if you find the right people, I feel like you can do anything. I know it sounds cheesy, but I feel like it's
No,
true.
I mean, that's a great point to add. And I would love if you could share because we have listeners specifically who are going through
Yeah.
this right now. And what's your advice to spouses who to even get started with that, to like go find their community? Sometimes you can feel, depending on where they're stationed at, like pretty isolated. I know I've had cousins stationed in Bahrain in particular, and
Yeah.
it's like when you see the sand stacked up outside your window, you're like, I don't want to leave my house. And like, or if it's like, 10 degrees below zero, you're like, I'm not
Right.
leaving my house. So it can be really hard in some circumstances to like want to go out there, or if they're extremely introverted. But what's sort
Mhm.
of your advice to going to find that community and taking that step?
Well, so I'm an extrovert, so it's
There
always
we go.
easier for me to get out of the house. So my husband, I would say, is an introvert. So there are times where, he looks at me and I'm like, "This is what I did today," and he's thinking that's not how I would do it. But if you have kids, you have to get out there anyway for your kids, for childcare or to go to the doctor, or if you're on a base to go to the commissary, or you know what, you have to eat. So to go to the store and things like that. And I think that, my advice might fall on deaf ears for those introverts in there because I might make it seem easy and it's not. But, you have to go out there and try and meet people and be real. I think that, you and I talked kind of offline about some of the challenges of spouses and other things. And it's like, yes, I get to live in these really cool places because of my husband's job, but that's separate from me. And so I try and make that as separate as I can. So people understand when they're meeting me or they're talking to me, I'm not like an extension of his job or his rank or anything like that, because then I feel like I want to make genuine relationships with other people. But I think it's easy to hide in your house or your apartment or whatever and feel as though the outside is a bit intimidating if you're in another country that doesn't speak the language, or there's some culture pieces you're still trying to figure out. But if you don't go out there and try, you're not gonna meet those people. I mean, I was thinking about this today when before we talked, I was thinking about, I'm like, what if she asked me what was my hardest moment or my most embarrassing moment or something
Here we
overseas?
go.
And
Let me ask you, what was your most
well,
embarrassing thing?
no, and I don't know if it was like my most embarrassing, but we had just moved to Germany and I had a tough time the first time we moved there because I gave up a really great job and I
Hmm.
was still sort of like, yes, we get to live in this beautiful place and we can see the Alps and we can do all that. And I'm like, nobody here speaks English. I don't know anyone. And that was like really hard for me to go out
Hmm.
because we were in a pretty remote place. And I went to the grocery store and the produce, everything. I just love everything about Germany, but I love the food and the produce and the vegetables. And I go to the grocery store and I fill up my entire cart with fruits and vegetables and all these things, right? In the bags. And I get to the front to pay, and the lady at the cashier is like saying a bunch of things to me and gesticulating in a way that like she can't help me or do whatever. And I'm like embarrassed because I'm like, what's going on? Like, does my card not work? Well, it turns out I was supposed to weigh everything and put the stickers on it. So they have like the individual weigh stations in the produce and the vegetable section where you weigh it and the sticker comes out and you put it on. They don't do that at the counter. So I had this enormous cart full of food that I had to load back into the cart and like walk away with my tail between my legs and figure out how to go use the scanner and the sticker thing and then some of these older ladies behind me sort of frustrated that I had delayed their day. And I'm thinking, well, at least I don't know anybody here. So I just had that, embarrassment on my own. But it's one of those things where it happens to everybody.
Oh,
So
thank you for sharing. That's a great story. I've never heard of someone going through that, but I think that's value add there in sharing that because
maybe my story will save someone else that sort
there
of
you
extreme
go. That's going.
humiliation.
Maybe we could like literally start a blog of like lessons learned and like as far as culture goes. Even just trying to like learn to speak that language sometimes can be a struggle of
Yes.
mispronunciation and saying something that you thought meant something else.
Yes.
So I've heard more of those ones. No, but that's a great story. And I was thinking you were gonna say that someone came and saved the day for you, but it looked like they just left you to navigate, you silly American, to your own
No, well, where
devices.
we were at the time, I mean, we were on the border of Germany and Switzerland and Austria. We were on this place called Lake Constance, and there were like no Americans there at all. So they probably thought I was some lost tourist. I'm not sure, but
You
um,
did you? It was like you should stick out like a sore thumb. They always say like for at least the guys, they stick out because Americans wear baseball hats and like throughout Europe
and
they don't wear the ball
flip-flops.
caps and flip-flops
Yes,
or
and
Crocs, right? Like
flip-flops.
Crocs
Yep.
everywhere.
Yeah, and
So
this was, I mean, this was like 15 years ago. So it was like,
right.
we moved from Colorado, so we'd wear like flip-flops and things like that. And
Like tell me you're an
Europeans are,
American without telling me you're an American, you know.
yep, your flip-flops. Yep, that's what it is.
No, I think that's great. That's a great story. But it goes to show about like getting yourself out there and also like I've spoken with to spouses who've actually started their own thing because it's like start a
Right.
play date. Like if there's a playground nearby, like and that's where I think social media has definitely been a game changer. But we're talking
Yes.
like I don't think Facebook was started until like 2008, somewhere around there, and
Yeah.
a lot of the other social medias have been in the last like several years. So it wasn't something that was really available 20 years ago, but nowadays now you can just like, hey, I'm going to be at the park at this
Right.
time with my kids, like anyone want to do a play date or even at the dog park, or just starting that. So I think that that's a great way, like you said, just doing the tasks that you would normally do. It's not like
Hmm.
you have to like start a dance class. It's just like doing the things that you already normally do and then just trying to
Hmm.
integrate like with other people that similar interests. No, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to
So
make it sound like it's easy because it's harder for others. It depends on where you are and what your personality type is. And I can say this now, but if we think about how many times I've had to do it, was it as graceful and easy the first time as it is now? No, it's just different. I mean, I'm back in the States now, and I'm back in a place where I lived 15 years ago, when we first
mhm.
met, but the city has changed and I'm still going through the same thing. I have to find a doctor, I have to find a dentist, I have to find, my kids, I need to find an orthodontist, all these things. One of my kids tried to cut an avocado a couple weeks ago with a sharp knife, and I thought we needed to go to urgent care. And I'm like, I don't even know where urgent care is yet. So I had to, look it up online because it's those things that you just have to figure out as you go along, and you have to be okay with that. And sometimes it's hard and it's uncomfortable and it tests your patience. And then sometimes there's conflict in the house, but that's just because, it's part of the getting settled, process.
Yeah, it's like, and I did want to touching on that too. Schools is obviously a big thing, and I
Yeah.
know for like civilians, right, that's a big part of what they're looking for, and real estate agents will even advertise, like the school's only a mile down the road, and it's like a 5-star
Mhm.
school, whatnot, or a
Mhm.
2-star school, and it does impact like where people end up living when they have kids. But as you alluded to, when you're in the military, you don't get that choice. Like you could end up in the middle of nowhere, and especially in the army where we're not required to be by any water. So we really could be in the middle
This is
of
so
nowhere.
true. Yeah.
So like thanks to the Marines and Navy, they get really beautiful duty stations, but not so much us. Like
Yes.
you said, it's like, do I have cell service? Can you hear me now? Calls drop on all the time. But I do want to ask you about that, about the school situation, because you did have little ones at the very start of his career. Now we're talking about like now his career fast forward. He's now nearing the end towards retirement. What was that like navigating schools, especially moving? We haven't even said out loud yet how many times you have moved, but if you're
I'd
open
have
to
to
sharing
like
that.
pause and do a mental check. But so to be honest, we were really fortunate. And my kids, I don't think that they understand. They will understand hopefully later how lucky and fortunate they are. But when we were overseas for 5 years straight, so my twins were born there, and my son was 2 when we went back. And so he was in like a German school for 2 years.
Mm,
And then when we went to Belgium, we were in the French speaking side of Belgium. So they were in the local Belgian schools for 3 years. So when
wow.
we moved to the US in 2018, that was actually the first, my twins were about to be 5. That was the first time they'd actually ever been to the US because we didn't travel back and forth when we were overseas and they were tiny, tiny. So that was our first entrance into the US system. And when we had moved to North Carolina when the kids were younger, we thought we were only going to be there 2 years. And I really did not know what to think about with schools or to navigate that. And so I was like, well, we're going to be here 2 years and they're younger. So this is fine. We found an area to live that was a short commute to the base and had sort of proximity to things that we needed. And that was that, right? I can't say I spent a lot of time looking into it because it was like I didn't know what to,
Right.
think about. And then we went to Paris for the year, and my kids were fortunate enough to go to an international school, which they were able to meet some kids from all over the world and other families that were like from the DoD or the State Department or the Justice Department who have also lived all over the world. So it was a nice exposure for them to just as a reminder that how accessible things are in the world to go see different
Mm,
places. So coming back to Colorado, I had a little bit more experience under my belt, but this is where, the community aspect helps, like use your friends or the people you meet who've had other experiences, and they might have particular advice about a school district, or you can read online and things like that. But I think some of it is you need to sort of pool your resources. So coming back to Colorado, we knew there were 2 school districts that we were looking at, and then we were just narrowing down, trying to find a place to live within either of those districts because our plan is to be here until our kids finish high school. So we
mm,
wanted to
mm.
try to put them in a place where they could spend the next 5, 6 years.
Right.
We'll see how that plays out, but there's only so much you can do, reading things online or looking at a map or some of that. If you have friends or there's Facebook groups, things like that to try, but also keep in mind everybody's opinions are sort of combined with their own experiences. So
Right.
filter
Absolutely.
some of that out. So I would say it's an art, not a science to do that. But I mean, my kids have only been in school 3 weeks here. So, maybe we'll do a follow-up in a year and I can tell you what
How
they
it
told me.
is. Do your kids speak other languages?
No, they spoke French when they were younger, but we came back to the US when my twins were about to be 5 and my son was about to be 7. So they were
Hmm.
fluent at the time, but that also goes in line with what their vocabulary was, right? So, I mean, I
Right.
definitely was using the oldest to
They're
like
not talking about
translate.
global warming in French.
Yeah, no. But I do remember in Belgium, I had like a flat tire and I was trying to talk to a mechanic and I was trying to ask my oldest to translate for me. And he's like looking at me like, I don't know the word for axle or wrench. And I'm like, well, can you just say it in a way like say the tire is broken or like trying to put it in, 6-year-old terms because it was going to be way better than whatever I tried, right? But they lost it. They got to re-engage a little bit with French when we lived in Paris last year. They have these phenomenal native accents, but limited vocabulary. So I think that their thirst for learning another language is
Is
there,
there.
and they would
I
pick it
love
up
that.
quicker. But we'll see, what they do with that. We've tried to give them the foundation of travel and
Mm.
experiences and language as much as we can, but some of that is now sort of up to them.
And I haven't
Press.
detected any accent in you yet for any words.
No, no.
Keep
Well, if you think about it,
keep
I've
true to that.
technically lived in a French-speaking country for 4 years, but I mean, the government doesn't give me any language training. And so, I mean, I speak Spanish. That
There you
is
go.
zero help in Belgium or France. It helped when I went to
Get to that.
Barcelona for the weekend, but
Yeah, or Barcelona. Oh yeah. Take me there. No, this
yeah.
is all very great information. And part of why I love that you're sharing personal stories is because I'm hoping our listeners will be able to take get that opportunity to reach out to you if they do need somebody who
Oh,
it's
of
like, oh my
course.
gosh, I can so relate to what you're saying right now.
Yeah.
Been there, done that. And or like I'm going through it right now and I have no idea how to get out of this hole. So I really appreciate you sharing the personal
Yeah.
stories there. The one thing that I did want to touch on that we haven't yet is that you are married to an officer. And I know some would say, like you said, to keep the rank separate when it comes to being as a spouse, but we understand, like I even know, like as a kid I was a Navy brat, and there was like enlisted housing, and then there was officer housing, and then there was like the programs that were like only for enlisted or things that only for the
Mhm.
officers. um and so I was wondering if you could talk through that dynamic there of like how involved were you in engaging, did the rank so much matter in engaging with the spouses in that sense of community, as you say? Was that a factor at all? And what was your experience?
I don't know that so if you might have to ask someone who I interacted with if it affected kind of their perception of me. I mean, I think that, when my husband was in like a command position when my kids were really young, I partnered with this. I mean, I joke that she's like my sister wife because she and was the one that came over to my house every day when my kids were young, and her
Mhm.
husband was a senior enlisted leader. And my husband and her husband worked together, and we worked together. We were friendly, but I sort of let her take the lead on things like that because I was kind of drowning with babies and dog and things like
Right.
that. And to be honest, like because I didn't grow up in that environment, like I don't really know. There's always like the things you are supposed to do or not do, but I do feel like within the Special Forces community, the lines are a lot more blurry when it comes to enlisted versus officers. And maybe I
Agree.
can say that from where I'm sitting, and someone on the other side would completely disagree with me. But I feel like the lifestyle is so similar whether you're enlisted or officer. Like you're moving, it's a high op tempo, there's a lot of disruption. You're home, like your spouse isn't home a lot. You kind of all have to be on the same team in order to just mentally get through that and support your family. So,
Yep.
I try to be there for anyone that needs, help, but I'm not a mind reader. So I never knew, like I participated when I could, but I also don't go out of my way to be like, well, I have all the answers, because I don't. But I'm very open to being like, this was hard for me, this was easy for me, that I wouldn't have done, I'm honest, maybe too honest in some ways, but maybe I'm not polished, but I think that I hope that people feel comfortable coming to me and asking me questions or seeking me out. So I don't, but again, you might have to have like a sidebar of like someone else be like,
It's like
no, Maureen is not
next, an
afraid to.
enlisted spouse, and what are your
Yeah,
perspectives?
Maureen
They're all
said that,
horrible.
but no, but
They
I
need an
think that I did not
acknowledgement.
know my husband before
Right.
he joined like the special operations community to know, and I know that within like the larger units and sort of the conventional army, I think that my understanding is that there is more of a separation between the officers and enlisted soldiers and families and things, but I haven't seen that play out, with our
Mm.
experience. But we've also been at a lot of NATO and joint command sort of
Mm.
assignments where we are around people from other countries, from the Navy, the Marines, the Air Force. And so when there's all of that sort of cross-pollination, then I kind of think that a lot of the rank and all that goes out the window because it's like we're all part of this very diverse community. So, but
No,
again,
I love that because I do think, and especially in the special forces community, it's definitely small teams. They're not going out in like an entire. like multiple companies going out at the same time.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like sometimes this commercial flight over wherever they're going, and it's like five
Right.
people or two
Mhm.
at a time. So it's definitely that smaller dynamic, and then having
Yeah.
that support at home. Like you said, that those lines really are blurred. So I love that you brought that up compared to special operations versus the conventional side of the house. And so I was gonna touch on, and I know we're nearing towards the end, but just some of your overall advice to spouses who may be going through a hard time with regards to this period now that your husband's kind of, like you said, the twilight end of career, those roles are starting to reverse now. You sound like you're embracing it, which is great. I know there's still like a level sometimes of like hesitancy and fear of like what's next, and being there for the
Yeah.
spouse. But do you have any sort of advice for somebody who may be going through that now with their service member?
Well, I think the closer we're getting to that time, the more I'm finding out about all these resources for the active duty soldier who is transitioning. There's so many programs out there that help with that. And then also there's a bunch of nonprofits, especially within the special operations community. That's really what I can speak to because that's
Yeah,
the most of what I
share that.
know.
That's
And
great.
I
Yeah.
and I can't remember all the names, so I might have to follow up with that later. But there's a lot of resources because I do think overall the DoD is noticing that one, supporting the spouses also helps with retention and recruitment, right? But also it
Yes.
helps with the continuing like mental health of the soldier and the family as they provide opportunities to ease the transition. But I mean, I think it'll be very interesting how this plays out in our house, for example, because, and I was talking about this with a friend and her husband retired, I think 2 or 3 years ago. And we're talking about, I'm in my mid 40s and how many times have I had to now start over in a new country, a new community, like not knowing anyone with kids or without kids. Kids actually makes it easier to put yourself out there, right? And my husband has all these amazing experiences and things that I could never do. But he's never really had to go and do what I've done, right? And so when he gets out and it's like he's entering an entirely new world, if unless he chooses to stay within sort of the DoD world, if he wants to go branch out and work in like truly the civilian world where I've been, it's a whole new set of norms and cultural expectations. I mean, acronyms, all the things, right? And I
Right.
have all the reps in of starting over, but if someone's active duty and you are active duty, right? You think about you move and there's probably some disruption at home, but then you go to work and you might have a continuity binder and you may or may not know some of the people at work. And I'm simplifying this just for the sake of our conversation, but then you start work and you have resources there and you kind of understand what's expected of you and who to ask or where to go, right? So I think as we go into this phase of transition, as my husband's trying to think about what does he want to do, what does he not want to do, does he have any idea? I don't know. He's going to have some of these sort of, you know, what's the right way to say it? Like he's going to go through these new experiences and not have sort of the experience itself of totally starting over. And I need to make sure I remain, sympathetic and patient because I'm kind of like, well, I've already done this 10 times. So what's so hard? I want to make sure that I don't
Oh
say
yeah.
that, but I think it's, but I think, I'm going to have to rewind 15, 20 years and be like, well, how did I feel doing this the first time and being in a new environment with new norms and terminology and just like it's a whole new planet. So I think, there's just tons of resources out there, whether it be with the nonprofits or I don't know if the military offers any transition services for spouses, but I think there's a couple that you can go through as sort of as a family or as a couple. So awareness on as you retire and resources out there. I would definitely try and become educated on what there are because you shouldn't just be out there on your own island trying to everybody's dealing with the new norm and their new identity because there's other people doing it too. So seek out other people in the community. Everybody thinks that you
That's
kind of
great.
have to suffer alone. You're the only one that's doing it or done it. And if you put yourself out there, you'll realize that you see that one person to say, I feel this way. And then everyone's like, me too, right? But not everybody wants to be the first one to say it.
No, and that was like the thing that really stuck out is you're like, I have my reps in. And then, like you said, rewinding. So I'm like, I kind of want our team to like remember that. Like, I have my reps in. So you as the spouse, there's still so much value added in that because you have gone through transitions, even marrying into the military community if you weren't already in it growing up, is a transition. And so like kind of that identification piece. And I know when I hung up the uniform from active duty, I struggled with that about what my why was, what I was going to do next, and I had to lean in hard into those veteran service organizations, and it was extremely intimidating because I it was hard for me to get that like I. They joke about how like sometimes we still can't like text and walk at the same time, or if we don't have like our headgear,
Right.
like our bray on, we feel like something's missing on our head, or
Hmm.
walking and talking on the phone. And so there's things that like your spouse is so used to doing that even at the rank they think right off the bat they're going to be getting a six-figure salary, and
Hmm.
just like that expectation, it's like, are they meeting that? Do they feel like a failure because they didn't get the job right after they got out retired, like, or are they going to take a break and figure that out? So that family dynamic is different for each family, but knowing that there's resources out there, so I love that.
Well, think about this, because you're active duty and you were walking around. Your name is on your uniform, all the things that you've done, your rank, all those things, they're there. So when you walked into a room, you could kind of read the room, right? To understand who's there, who's making the decisions, what are some other people's backgrounds, right? Because it's all the
Hmm.
patches and all the things.
All the
But you
tabs,
leave the
all the things, yeah.
military and everybody shows up in a white shirt and black gym shorts, and it's like, no one knows all those things anymore. And whether or not
Hmm.
it doesn't matter if you're officer enlisted or you're airborne or not. It's like you're showing up in a room and you have to kind of start over and prove yourself and demonstrate your skills and all that, and you haven't had to do that before because it kind of entered with you on your
There's no more
uniform.
the team dynamic. I think is the hard
Yeah.
part of like who am I? Like that 30-second elevator pitch was so hard because I'm like, I can tell you what my buddies do. Like he's really good at this, she's
Right.
really good at that. She's total badass, excuse my French, but like to know that what how do I talk about Mary Kate in that 30-second pitch of just that deliverable of what I can offer to a team was really challenging because we weren't wired to think that way. It's like they totally
Mhm.
stripped that me aspects from day one to try to mold you into that.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, like I love how you said rewinding the clock too, to think about where you were at like 15 years ago or so. So that's fantastic advice. And as we end up wrapping up here, I would love to know how spouses can, or our listeners, even if it's someone still serving or a veteran or someone who just wants to know more about the military, can reach out to you and hear more.
I think the easiest way might be to just find me on LinkedIn because my name
Mhm.
will be there. I don't think there's anyone on there with the same name. Um,
Yeah,
and if
check
you
it out.
find me on social media, you can reach out to me. I think it's harder because I've made my profile harder to find. So I don't know if you can just like search on Facebook or something and actually find my name. So unless we have like a common friend,
I was like,
that's just
depends what they do for a living in the military. They'll find you.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. Some of you might be able to find me no matter what. But yeah, I'm open, or if you email Mary Kate and she can give my contact info, things like that. But I think if anyone listening that knows me knows that like I'm open and I'm pretty much an open book, maybe too open sometimes, but uh please don't hesitate because I think that I'm only where I am because of the people that I've met along the way who have helped me or supported me, and some of them didn't even know that they were helping me out the way they were. They were just happened to be a good friend that came into my life at the right time, and so I'm happy to be that for someone else because you don't really know where someone is in their mind sometimes and or where they're coming from, and just you need to just be open to helping others, I think.
I love that. Thank you so much. That's a great way to close off just that whole experience. And I love what you alluded to earlier about you're not on an island. And if you feel like you are, you don't have to stay on that island. There's a lifeboat right down down the way for
Right.
you, down the beach. So just take it, lean into that community that's around you. There's so many other resources to even just ease into it. Like you said, social media is another great way. But thank you for that. And again, uh, I'm Mary Kate Saliva. Thank you so much, Maureen, for joining me today on
Thanks for
Veteran
having me.
Voices. And you're welcome back anytime, as you said, like maybe we get to that transition where he's actually retired and I'll be like, doing a check-in. Are you all
Yeah.
still
Can we have
still
wine
surviving over there?
during that podcast?
Like lots of wine. Be like, are you still treading water there? Or yeah, how's that going? I might even have to get him on here once he hangs up the uniform to kind of see how he's doing in the retired capacity. But both always welcome. Best of luck to you and your family
Thank
and to
you.
our listeners. Please reach out to Maureen for her nuggets of wisdom. I'm sure there's so many more stories like the grocery store one that she didn't get the chance to share today. So thank you again for joining me on Veteran Voices. They should need to talk to Scott about that rename adding in for military spouses. But there's so much value added, and as they say, behind like every great service man and woman is an incredible spouse or a support system behind them. So thank you so much. And we hope to see you all here on Veteran Voices. Again, we are part of the Supply Chain Now programming, a podcast where you can get it anywhere you get your podcast from. And we're in proud partnership with the Guam Human Rights Initiative, where you can learn more about their great work at guamhri.org. And again, as we say here on Veteran Voices, do good, pay it forward, and be the change that's needed. I'm Mary Kate Saliva, your host, and we will see you all again next time.